Let's do a line tutorial. So I have some lines here, and you could select them and deselect them when you click on them. And in this one, when you get all 4 lines around the square, they get highlighted. So I have my scene here. I have a main camera, orthographic, and then I have a canvas with a background image, which you can resize to the size of the canvas here, right? So I'm ready to go. What I need is a square. So I'm going to generate, I'm going to make a new sprite square. And there it is. And then I'm going to convert this into a prefab. So that's my prefab to use. We don't need this anymore. So that's my prefab to make the squares. The next thing is I need 2 scripts to continue with. Okay, I made 2 scripts here, and the first one I'm going to look at is the square script, or the first one I work with, right? So what do we need in the square script? We need some variables. So here we need activate a color and idle color, to go between these two, right? I'm going to keep track of the row and column the squares on. I want to know if it's activated or not, so we can choose one of these colors based on this Boolean variable, right? I'm also going to save a reference to a sprite renderer because we're changing colors a lot, so this will save a little time. I'm going to add an awake function and set my variables, right? So that means at the beginning, when this is formed, it'll set. Now, these are all private, so I'm going to do some getters and setters too. So I'm using a getter here, or a setter, to set this variable. So I'm going to put my getters and setters down here, and this is how the getters work. So remember, this variable is activated. It has a lowercase I. So I'm going to put an uppercase. So if somebody wants to access this variable, they have to use the uppercase, right? And it's a getter. So if you use this and say is activated, it'll return the value, and also it'll reset the value. When you reset the value, I want to highlight or unhighlight. So I need a highlight function too. I'll get to that in a moment. The same thing with the sprite render. I've got a getter and setter with the capital S. This is what you use to set the variable or change it. I'm going to add 2 new functions here. The first one is the highlight one. So based on is activated, if it's activated, we're going to do the different colors, right? So, and also I want to do a init square. So when the square is formed, I want to set these variables, right? You'll see how that works. So this is the square class, right? And right now there are no lines here to work with, but we'll get to that later. Here's the level class. Same as the square, we need some variables. So I need the square prefab, right? Because I'm going to use this as a template. I also, for positioning, where all the squares are going to be located, we have an offset, a scale, a gap, and then we want to know how many rows and columns to make, and also we're going to save all the references to the squares, right, in a matrix. So the first thing is we're going to set up the level. When this is formed, we're going to make some squares. Okay. So setup level will look like this. We'll have the rows and columns, and then we're going to initialize the squares. Later on, we're going to have to make some lines too. So this will get a little more interesting later, but right now we're just going to make the square. So here's the init square function. We're going to initialize the matrix, right? So we can have our references in there. We're also going to put all the squares in one empty game object, so they're all together, right? And then I'm going to do my loop right through the matrix. We're going to instantiate the square prefab. We're going to set its position using the offset, its location, the scale and gap, right? So what this does is this positions it in the correct location, right? The C and R are changing, so that means the location will be changing. We're going to scale it, maybe, right? If possible. If the scale is changed, this will do it, right? So later on we could try that. We'll give the object a name, so if we look at it in the scene, we can tell what's what, right? And then we'll set its parent, which is the uh, square holder, right? So they'll all be in the parent. The next thing is we'll get the component square. So we want a reference to that, and we're gonna put it in the sorting layer too. When you're working in 2D, it's good to have a sorting layer so you know which object is on top because they're all in the same Z location. So you want to control the rendering, right? And then this is the init square, remember that, right? Init square, I'm going to set the location, and then I'm going to give this a reference. Now, one thing I didn't do, I didn't add this square script to the prefab. So let me do that right now. So I'm going to go to the prefab right here. And you see this, if I was trying to run this now, it would give me a null reference error because there is no square script. So now there is, so everything is pretty good. Back to the scene, I need the script, the level script to execute. So I'm going to make a new entity called level and drag that script over. The level script, oops, sorry, has to be selected, right? And we need the square prefab. So the square prefab right here, and let's give it a shot, right? So it looks like it made the squares. They're kind of close together. If you look at all the, see they're there, right? They're just close together. I can move them around. Let me change the gap a little bit just to show you. We really don't want a gap in the game, but just to show you, I'm going to put a 0.2, oops, 0.2 gap. So they're a little separated. Okay, so there are the squares. And now we're ready to make the line. Just like with the square prefab, I need a line prefab. So this is going to be an empty object. I'm going to call that line prefab right here. Oops, let's change that. So line prefab, it's not a prefab yet, but when I drag it in here, now it is. There's my line prefab. A line prefab needs a line renderer. So I'm going to search in here for a line renderer. There it is. A line renderer has many options, for the line, but we're going to control all this through the script, like the sorting layer, the width, and all that. But I need a script. So I'm going to make a new script called line. And we're going to open that up and take a look. In the line render, we're going to need some variables. So we need to know if it's a vertical line or horizontal line because we need to know how to draw it vertically or horizontally. So I made it enumerated here. Right? We need to know what color to draw it. And also, as we click and unclick, we need to know the thickness. So, they could play around with that, right? Every line needs 2 points. So you need 2 vectors in 3-dimensional space, 2 points essentially to make the line. We also need to know if it's selected, so we can change the thickness, and we need to know what type. These are all static because they're shared. Enumerated is always static in C#, right? So these are shared variables, and these variables over here are instance variables, particular to every line. The other thing we need is we need a list of squares that the line is on. When I click the line, I need to know what square is affecting. In this case, it's always going to be 2. One line is shared between 2 squares. Just like before, since we're changing the line every time I want a reference to the line renderer. I'm going to add an awake function, and I should do this too. And I'm going to set these 2 variables, right? So the line renderer, I'm going to get a reference to it, and I'm going to initialize my line square list, right? So as I add lines, it won't crash. We need to instantiate the list. Now, before I move on, I'm going to do something interesting. I really don't use this too much, but I'm going to make regions. As you see, I have a region here called variable, and then this region ends over here. Now, what's nice about it is that you can close the whole region up, so it really helps in the clutter. And then you could open it up and close it up. I have a region initialize, right? And that's to awake, start, and update. Now, this technically should be gameplay, but we're never going to use this anyway, so I'll leave it. And then I have my region. I'm going to close this. Let's see. I'll have my getters and setter region, which I'm going to do right now. So here are my getters and setters, right? I have is selected. Again, using a capital I, it returns is selected. Now, when you select and deselect, I'm going to draw the line. We'll show you how to do that. We have to redraw the line every time, right? I have my type. We'll talk about this in a moment, because when you click on a line, you need a collider, and the collider is either going to be vertical. Right now, we'll leave that in there, right? We don't have it yet, and of course, list of squares, getters, and setters. Okay, let's first do the collider. So a collider, like I said, has to be on for something to be selectable, meaning you click on it, you need a collider. The little trick here is, though, we have to set the collider either vertical or horizontal. So you could see if this is vertical, the vertical is a little longer than the horizontal. If it's horizontal, then the X is longer. So you have to play around this maybe, but we need different colliders, right? We don't want the collider to be too large because then they'll overlap. The other thing is, to execute a function, when you click on something, it has to be a trigger. The collider has to be a trigger. So you'll see how it works a little later. Okay, let's get to the draw. So that's part of the gameplay here, right? So I'm going to minimize all the other ones. So in gameplay, there's going to be two functions. One of them is to redraw the line. So we're going to we're going to set the thickness based on the selected, right? If it's selected, thickness changes, right? And then you have to do a couple of things. To make a line, you need to set the vertex count, the position. And remember, we have 0.1, 0.2, so that's our position here. These are two vectors, right? So 0.1, 0.2, or 0 and 1 in this case, right? Set the thickness of the line. This is a couple of things in there to make sure you have the right dimensions and everything, right? We'll set the sorting layer, sorting order, and all that stuff. And this is a critical thing for the line to show up. There are various ways you can render and then set the color. You could also put a material on the line, but I'm not going to use this right now. So that sets the line. So the last thing to do here with the line is to put it on the line prefab. Okay, so I need to remove the filter, and I need to go to add script, get into my right folder, and add the line script. So we're ready to go now to make a few lines. Back in the level class, we're going to, after initializing the squares, we're going to initialize. Now, initializing lines is going to be a little tricky because we're going to go through the grid and we're going to make a horizontal line and a vertical line. Horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical. Now, this horizontal line is going to be shared by these two, but the problem is on the first line, there is no bottom square, so that's like special. Also on the top square, we're not going to have a vertical line, we're only going to have a horizontal line. Also on every line, the last point will only have a vertical line, and it's only shared by one square. So it's a little complicated to be sure, this is done right. Okay, so here's the function, right? The function, of course, I have a line holder like before. I have some local variables, right? But the key is to make a decision. what lines to make and with whom to share it with. So I go through the whole matrix. Now, one thing about the lines, there is a line at the end also, so that's why you have this equal, right? With the squares, we don't have that problem. It's always less than because with a line, we have one more row and one more column of lines. So the first point is always going to be calculated like the square, right? Where the square begins. But the second point, and also who shares that line and what kind of line we're going to make, is different under different situations. So if the row is zero, so if row is zero, we know we have the bottom row. If the column is zero, we're gonna make a vertical horizontal, but they're not going to be shared by anybody except that one square, right? So just think, back to the other thing that I had over here, right? So if I'm making these two lines, they're not shared by two squares, only one square. So we got to handle that. It's separate logic, right? Let's continue. Now, if I'm in the last column, so I'll go back again over here. If I'm in the last column, I will not make the horizontal line. I'll only make the vertical line, and it's only shared by one square. Now, all these other ones are shared by two squares. So you see, it could be pretty interesting. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just to breeze through this. If I'm in the top row, it's kind of a similar situation. I showed you before. In the top row, you have no vertical lines, right? When you're in the top row, so you won't see any vertical lines here, only horizontal lines. Yeah, I don't know why that's there, but we'll see. So, oh, I'm sorry. This is this is for all the other rows. So if you're in the top row, you're only going to have a horizontal line. Otherwise, you're going to have many different lines. So anyway, let's go through one example. Okay, this was a little off, I noticed after taking a look. It's either the top row or the bottom row, else everything in the middle. So this was a little off. I needed this bracket there. So let's do one, right? So I'm in the bottom row, and at the first column. So I need to make a vertical line. So I need to calculate the second point. Well, this is a vertical line, so the second point will be equal to the first point. These are vectors, and it's going to be the scale will be in the y direction, right? So whatever the scale is, this is going to be pointing up. So if so let's take a look at this one more time, right? So if this is my first point, and that's going to be my second point on top in the y direction. Wrong one here. Okay, so of course I need to make the object, right? So I use my, well, actually, I make I have a function here that makes the line. I pass in all the variables, and it'll make that line. We'll look at that in a moment, how the line is made. But let's go through this top level. The other thing is I'm going to get the line component, right? Just like we did with the square, and I'm going to initialize it, and then I need to add it to the square, right? Because that square, in this case, it's only one square, and that square is in the same position. So let's take a look at this function first, right? Make a game object. I'm going to go down, and I'm going to paste this in, right? This is the function. These are all the variables: the location, row and column, its position. Forgot what that was. The line type, what was that? That was, oh, the second point, yeah, okay. So, and then is a vertical, horizontal, and its parent, right? So we make it the line, which is the line prefab, right? We set its scale, just in case we're scaling here. Again, we give it a name, and we set its parent. We get the line script off the object, and we initialize. We initialize the line to the variables. So the line is formed with this function. Okay, In here, we're missing this function in the line class where we initialize it. We didn't take care of that earlier. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm in right after the collider. We're going to initialize that. So here's the function. You're going to give me the two positions and the type, and we're going to initialize all the variables. And notice we're using the setter here. So when you give me the type, it'll go to the getter and setter, and yeah, if you give me whether it's selected or not, it'll draw the line properly. So remember how the draw line works here. The draw line decides whether it's thick or not, right? So that takes care of the line. In the square class, we're going to start adding some lines. So I need to know what kind of, I need to indicate which, the position of each line. So I'm going to use a numerator type again. So this will indicate the 4 lines, instead of using 0, 1, 2, and 3, 4, I'm going to use a numerator type. This is easy to read. So the next thing is I'm going to use a dictionary to store each line. Now, a dictionary is a little different than an array. Array has a structure. This doesn't have a structure. This is uses a key. So if I give it a key, like if I say top, it'll give me that line that's in that who has that key. So in this case, and there's some limitation here. You can't have 2 keys, identical keys, so they all have to be unique. So this is how I'm going to do it. So this is pretty nice. Is that if I know the key, if I give you the key, it'll give me the right line. So so that's how a dictionary works. Once I have the dictionary, I have to instantiate it, right? So this is the dictionary instantiation. That means I have it. Now I can add some lines to this. Okay, so I need the function init line. I'm going to put over here. Or set line. So you give me the location, top, bottom, and you give me the line, and I'll add it to the dictionary. So the key is the line, top, and then this is the line. So later on, I could go through them. In the line script, we need a function to add the square to this line. So here's a function. You give me the square, it'll add it to this list. Remember we said there's only going to be 2 squares, maximum 2 squares for each line. But the reason we need to know this is when you click on a line, you need to know what square is affected. Otherwise, how are you going to highlight that square? Here we go. In the levels, we still have a little problem here. We don't have a line prefab, right? We didn't add that as an instance, so let's add it. So I'm going to add a new prefab here, line prefab, and that should take care of all, if I save everything, it should take care of all the errors. You see, all the errors are gone. Wow, one thing though is in my level, I need to add now a line prefab. See, it popped up. So let me go and get the line prefab and put it in here. Okay, so all the errors are gone, and now we just need to fill this up. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to show us just a few examples. So we did the vertical line. The vertical line only has 1 square, right? The horizontal line, now remember this is row 0 and this is the first column, right? So we do have both lines. So the second point here, if you look at the scale here, this is a horizontal line. So the horizontal line, the x is going to be longer. Right? We make the object and we add it to the same square. So that will be this square right here at 0, 0. These 2 lines will be added to that square. Okay, what if we're in the first row and we're in the last column? So we only make a vertical line. See, so we only make, now also I forgot one thing. I need to indicate for each line, the square, what position that's in. So you see, this is the left position, and this is the bottom position of that first square. On the last one, it's the square before me, right? Because this is that extra column, right? So you need to give this, you need to set this to the square before. That's why it's -1, and it'll be the right, that vertical line will be the right line of that square. So take a look at this. If I'm making this line, it belongs to this square right here. So it's the column before, and it's the right square. So you see how intricate this can get, but that's what you got to do, right? To continue, if we're in the first row, we're in the first row, right? But we're not in the first column or the last column, then we need to make a vertical and horizontal line. So, so there it is, we're making a line. Now, in this case, two squares share this line. So I have to indicate which squares, right? So I have to be careful here. You have to know the position and everything, right? So just to show you the picture here. So if I'm in this, if I'm between the first and last columns, this line right here is shared between these two, and also this vertical, horizontal line too, which is in this case not clickable. But okay, so if I go back here, so this is properly set. So you know, this, like I say, very intricate here to set these. So I'm not going to go through the rest, but it's similar, very similar, but you really have to be careful. First of all, which square gets the line? What kind of line to make? What square gets the line? And also its position for the square or direction. So once this function is done, and as you see, it's all very intricate, but it's all there. Let's take a run. Let's take a run, see how it goes, right? So I'm going to make sure I have saved everything, and I'm going to go back to my project. I'm going to run, and so I can see the lines are a little off, and the reason is because the square, the alignment for the square is at the center. So if I select my square sprite, you'll see that it's center, but I really want it to be bottom left, right? So, oops. So I move this. So I want it to be bottom left. Okay. Apply, and let's close. Let's try it again. Okay, so now the lines are matching up to the squares. I removed the gap, by the way, too, right? Let me maximize this on play just so we can see this a little better. So here it is. These are the lines, and they're conformed to the squares nicely. So the next part is we need to make these clickable, and then something should happen, right? Let's add back in the line class. I'm going to go to the gameplay region, and we're going to add a built-in function called onMouse down, right? So I'm going to give you the position of the line. This could be row and column, right? Row and column. Well, actually, I don't have a row and column here, do I? Let's see. Line. No, it's just the position. Okay. Scratched. Okay. Now, when you click it down, I'm going to change the is selected to true if it's false, and vice versa, right? So if it's false, so this just flips it, right? And when you flip it, of course, it goes to the getter, to the setter, and redraws the line based on that, right? So this will be the thin and thick line bit, right? Now we need a function in the level that will handle the square part, right? We need to check those squares to see whether they're going to be selectable or not, right? So I'm in the level class. I'm going to minimize these regions a little bit. So minimize this. So I need a gameplay region, right? So I'm going to do region gameplay and then region. So what do I do here? I need that function. The line is selected, but one interesting thing I forgot to mention here is when I want to send the line that's been selected to the level so it knows what line. So this is again referring, remember we used the word this, it refers to the object where this script is on, right? So this refers to the object. So in level, what do? We go to that square, we, I'm sorry, we go to the line and we get all its squares, right? And that's a getter. So I get the list. Now it's only going to be one or two, right? Like we said. And I'm going to do a loop though. I could, if it's one or two, actually a loop is better because if it's one or two, you're going to have to figure that out. So go through the loop and each square is going to have a function to determine whether what we're going to call it an update solution, meaning all four lines have been selected, right? So we need that function in the square class. So I'm in the square class. I got my regions here all collapsed. And I'm going to open up the gameplay, right? And I'm going to add that function called update solution state. So this is the square. What does the square do? Well, it goes through all the lines and checks to see if they're all true. If one of them is not true, you're not in your solution state, right? So I got a flag to keep track of that. And then the flag, whether it's true or false, calls the setter is activated. If you remember, is activated has the function highlight. So every time so when you, let me see, so, okay, so anytime you click a line, you're going to come over here, you're going to check all the lines, and we're going to determine whether the square is red or not based on that function. Okay, so we have an issue here, and the issue comes up as this, right? How do I'm in the line class, and I want to call the function in the level class. Right, so how do I reach this object, right? I'm in the level class, and here, this is the object, the level object. But how do you access an object, another object from one class from another, in other words, right? So I have this something called, there is a way to do it, there's a few ways to do it. One way to do it is to have what we call a singleton class. A singleton, I should say singleton pattern. So the way singleton pattern works is like this. In the level class, I'm going to add a singleton region, right? And this is what it's going to have. It's going to have a static reference to this object. Now, if you recall, a static variable can be accessed through the class name, right? And what does this do? What does this do? So do I have two awakes here? I have to check that, right? But what I do is I have a singleton reference. So I make the object, the key is you cannot have two of them. So you see the way this works, if you have another one that's hanging around, it will destroy it. So you can only have one, and this guarantees you only got one. I'll double check and then you of course have to call the function, right? You have to call the function. I don't know, let me see if I have an awake. I can't have two awakes, let me see. Start, update, no. So I'm okay. So now, when you go to a line, you go through the class name, you get the instance, and then you can get the function. So this is a way to reach other classes, other objects in your project. Like I said, there are other ways too. So let's give this a run through, right? I'm over here. Looks like everything is set. I'm going to maximize. Do I have maximize on? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to run this and test it out. So when I select the line, it highlights, right, because it changes its state, right, on and off. And then and of course every every square is checking to see if 4 lines have been selected. So you see these 4 lines have been selected, so the square turns red. If I shut it off, it goes on. So here, so that's the, tutorial with lines. Essentially, you need a line renderer. So that's the key to the whole thing.